All right, so you guys want to talk flexible dieting, huh? You came to the right place. We're going to dig into all the sources you send over and really try to get to the bottom of this whole flexible dieting thing, see what's actually there.
Sounds good to me.
So we've got tons of Lyle McDonald here. Seems like he's kind of the king of this stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we're going to be focusing on like the core ideas, like what makes flexible dieting tick, why those typical diets, those ones you see everywhere, why those tend to fall apart for people. And I think most importantly, we're going to pull out those strategies that you can actually use, like long term, right? Not just something that works for a week and then you're back to square one.
Definitely. The sustainability factor is huge, and that's something that McDonald really hits on.
Absolutely. And, along the way, we'll be talking about why diets can be such a pain to stick with, both like physically and mentally, because it really is both, right? It's not just one or the other.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot going on both in your body and in your head when it comes to dieting. It's a lot more complex than most people realize.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about the difference between just seeing a lower number on the scale and actually losing that fat, right? Because those aren't always the same thing, not even close sometimes.
No, not at all. That's a really common misconception that can really mess with people's progress and motivation.
For sure. And then, of course, we got to get into those flexible strategies McDonald talks about, like the free meals, the structured refeeds, even taking like intentional breaks from dieting. That one always throws people off a little bit, but it's actually a really powerful tool when used strategically.
Oh, yeah. It can be a game changer when you understand how to implement it correctly.
Right. So much of this comes down to understanding the why behind everything, and that's what we're here to do today. So one thing that really stood out to me from McDonald's work is just how, like, relatable he makes the whole diet experience sound. Like, you start off, you're motivated, you're following the plan, maybe even seen some results, and then, boom, life happens.
Yeah, exactly. He paints this really familiar picture, right? A treat shows up at work, a social event pops up that you can't really get out of. Maybe you just have a day where your willpower feels like it went out for a coffee and never came back. It happens to everyone.
Exactly. And it's so easy to like let that one little slip up derail everything. It's that I've already messed up, so I might as well go all out kind of thinking.
Well,
or maybe you see a big holiday coming up and it feels impossible to stick to the plan, so you just kind of throw in the towel before you even start.
it's that all or nothing mentality that gets so many people. And honestly, it's one of the biggest reasons why people end up feeling like they've failed at dieting.
Oh, 100%. That feeling of having to be perfect all the time is just not sustainable. You're setting yourself up for failure before you even begin.
Right. And McDonald talks about that statistic that gets thrown around a lot, the 95% weight regain figure. Now, the exact number might be debatable, but the message is clear. The vast majority of people who lose weight end up putting it back on. And he makes a crucial point. The problem usually isn't the initial weight loss itself. It's keeping it off in the long run. That's where most people struggle.
Right. It's like you can white knuckle your way through a restrictive diet for a few weeks or even a few months, but eventually that just becomes too hard to maintain.
It's not a sustainable way to live.
Yeah.
And it's really not necessary.
Exactly. He boils the whole weight loss thing down to a really simple principle. Calories in versus calories out. Eat a little less, move a little more, and just keep doing that, forever.
Yeah.
Simple, right? In theory.
He even kind of jokes that his whole job is basically taking that simple concept and writing a whole book about it.
I mean, yeah, that's basically what we're doing right now, right? Expanding on that one simple idea. But of course, it's not as simple as it sounds.
Right.
We all know that keep doing that indefinitely part is the real challenge.
Exactly. It's not just about knowing the formula. It's about understanding the why, the how, and finding strategies that work for you as an individual. And that's where flexible dieting comes in. It's about addressing the real reasons why making those changes last can be so tough. Because it's not always just about willpower.
Okay, so let's dive into that a little bit. Chapter 2 in his book goes into this thing that I think a lot of people don't totally get. The difference between, like, just losing weight and actually losing fat. Can you unpack that for us? What's the big deal there?
Sure. So when we talk about weight loss, we're just talking about a decrease in your total body weight, that number on the scale, right?
The one we all obsess over.
Exactly. But that number, it doesn't tell the whole story. Your body, it's not just a big bag of fat, You've got lean body mass too. That's your muscles, your organs, bones, even water, all the stuff that isn't fat. So your body fat percentage, that's the proportion of your total weight that's actually fat.
So someone could lose, 10 pounds, but that could be a mix of fat, muscle, water. The scale doesn't tell you what's actually going right.
Absolutely. You could be losing muscle, which you definitely don't want, especially if you're working out. He uses this comparison that I think makes it really clear. Imagine you've got a super lean athlete, like a marathon runner or something, right?
All right, picture that.
And then you have someone who maybe doesn't exercise as much, has a higher amount of body fat, but they weigh the same. See, the athlete, they're going to have way less body fat, but more lean muscle. So even though the scale says the same thing, their bodies are totally different on the inside.
Right, totally different composition, yeah.
And that makes a big difference, not just for how they look, but for their overall health and how their body functions.
That's a great example. So if we're really trying to be healthier, look better, and have our body work the way it should, we got to focus on losing fat specifically, not just chasing a lower number on the scale.
You got it. And this is something that becomes even more important when we start talking about those different dieting strategies because, some strategies might lead to more water weight fluctuations than others, and that can really mess with your head if you're just looking at the scale. You might think you're failing when you're actually making progress.
That makes total sense. All right, so we talked about why sticking to those, like traditional diets, is so tough and why we got to focus on losing fat. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of why diets fail us in the first place.
Yeah.
Chapter 3 is all about how our bodies regulate weight. This is where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah. This is where we see that our bodies, they kind of have their own agenda. It's not always on board with our weight loss goals.
Right, like it's fighting back against us.
McDonald uses this analogy of a thermostat, which I think is really helpful.
Okay.
You set your thermostat to a certain temperature, and then the system kicks in to keep it there. Turns the heat on if it gets too cold, the AC on if it gets too hot.
Makes sense.
Our bodies, they do something similar with our weight, or more accurately with our level of body fat. It wants to keep things within a certain range.
So there's this set point.
Mhm.
I know some people call it a settling point that our body tries to stick to. Can you explain what that means, practically?
Basically, it's the level of body fat your body is most comfortable with. Now, this set point, it's not necessarily fixed forever. It can change over time depending on your diet, your exercise, even different stages in your life, like pregnancy or aging. The settling point idea says that your weight will tend to stabilize at a certain level based on your habits and your environment. Like, if you're constantly eating a ton of calories and not moving much, your set point's probably going to shift upwards.
Right. It's like adjusting your thermostat over time.
Exactly. So if we try to lose weight, especially too quickly, our body might resist that change. It wants to keep things the way they are.
And how does it do that? How does our body actually fight back against us trying to lose weight?
It's got a few tricks up its sleeve. When you start dieting, you're basically changing the energy balance in your body, right?
Yeah.
Eating less, moving more, maybe both.
Right. Less energy coming in.
Your body, it senses that shift and it's like, hold on, got to conserve energy here. So it might start slowing down your metabolism, making you feel hungrier than usual, even subtly reducing those little movements you make throughout the day, like fidgeting or pacing around. It's all about conserving energy.
So that feeling of your metabolism just crashing and those crazy hunger pangs, it's not just in our heads. There's a real reason for that.
Oh, yeah, it's not just willpower. There are hormones involved, too.
Hormones, okay.
Yeah, McDonald talks about some key players here, like leptin, insulin, ghrelin, peptide, YY. They act like these little messengers, sending signals to the hypothalamus in your brain. That's the control center for hunger, energy expenditure, all that good stuff.
So these hormones are basically telling our brains to eat more, slow down, and hold on to that fat.
Exactly. For example, when you lose fat, your leptin levels, which help you feel full, they tend to drop. So you end up feeling hungrier.
It's like a double whammy.
It is. And then on top of that, he points out that this whole system, it's not exactly fair. Our bodies are often better at stopping us from losing weight than they are at stopping us from gaining it. Kind of a bummer, right?
Not fair at all. So is that why it feels like it's so much easier to gain weight than to lose it?
It's definitely part of it. And, evolutionarily, it kind of makes sense. Our ancestors, they went through periods of famine way more often than periods of, unlimited food. So our bodies evolved to be really good at storing energy as fat to help us survive those tough times.
Right, like a survival mechanism.
Exactly. Preventing weight loss was crucial for survival, but gaining weight, not so much of a threat back then. And then there's the whole spendthrift versus thrifty metabolism thing, which is super fascinating, but also kind of frustrating.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So some people, they seem to have these metabolisms that are like spendthrifts. They burn through calories easily, lose weight relatively easily and maybe have a harder time gaining it back. Others, they have these thrifty metabolisms. They hold on to calories like it's going out of style, making weight loss a real struggle.
Ah, so some people just have it easier than others genetically.
It seems that way, yeah. And the crazy thing is, the exact reasons behind these differences, scientists are still figuring that out. It's complex. But it does mean that some people are just going to have a harder time with weight loss than others, through no fault of their own.
That's a good point. It's not always just a matter of willpower. Okay, so our bodies are working against us, trying to keep us at a certain weight. And then chapter 4 throws in those psychological and behavioral factors that make dieting even harder. Like, is it the diet that fails, or do we fail the diet? It's like a chicken or the egg thing.
Right. It's a great question. And honestly, the answer is probably a bit of both. Our biology definitely plays a role, but so do our behaviors and how we approach dieting mentally. McDonald really pushes back against that whole diets don't work idea. He thinks that a lot of the time, it's the psychology and the behavior that trips people up.
And one of the biggest things he talks about is that all or nothing thinking, like having to be perfect all the time, which is just not realistic. That cookie example, that really hit home for me.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. The rigid dieter, they're like, okay, I'm on this diet and I have to follow it perfectly 100% of the time, no exceptions. And then they have one cookie or one slice of pizza and it's like the whole diet is ruined.
It's like they broke some sacred rule.
Right. And then the guilt sets in, they feel like they failed, and they just give up. That can lead to a binge, and then the whole cycle starts again.
It's like missing one workout and then just skipping the gym for the rest of the week.
Exactly. That's why that 80-20 principle is so important. If you can stick to your healthy habits, like 80% of the time, those little slip-ups in the other 20%, they're not going to derail your progress.
It's about consistency, not perfection.
Exactly. And it's also about seeing those slip-ups as part of the process, not as reasons to give up. You know, unless you're training for the Olympics or something, you don't need to be perfect.
It's about finding something that works for you long term. It's a lifestyle change, not a quick fix.
Exactly. And that brings us to another big issue, hunger. I mean, it's no wonder there are so many diet pills and stuff out there promising to suppress your appetite.
Right, like if we could just turn off hunger, dieting would be easy.
Oh, yeah, but it's not that simple. And, you know, we talked about this before. Hunger is super complex. It's not just your stomach grumbling. It's a whole bunch of signals from your body, your hormones, your brain, even your emotions can play a role.
So just popping a pill isn't going to solve the problem.
Not really. It might help temporarily, but it's not addressing the root of the issue. And, you know, those overly restrictive diets, the ones that tell you to cut out entire food groups or demonize certain foods, they can actually make things worse.
Oh, so?
Well, when you tell yourself you can't have something, you end up wanting it even more, right? It's like that forbidden fruit thing. And then when you finally give in, you're more likely to binge because you feel deprived.
It's like setting yourself up for a food fight with your own brain.
Exactly. A little bit of restriction can be helpful, but you gotta find that balance. McDonald points out that a lot of those popular diets, they work initially just because they create an automatic calorie deficit. Like, if you cut out all carbs or all fat, you're gonna be eating less overall.
Right. Less options, less calories.
But the problem is, people can't stick with those super restrictive diets forever. Eventually, they get tired of it, they start craving the foods they're missing, and then they overeat.
And that's where things fall apart.
Exactly. He's really big on making sure you're getting enough protein, too. Not just for building muscle, but for keeping you feeling full and satisfied.
Protein, fiber, healthy fats. That's the magic combo, right?
Pretty much. Protein helps you feel full, fiber keeps things moving, and those healthy fats are crucial for your overall health. Plus, they taste good.
Exactly. It shouldn't feel like you're punishing yourself. And at the end of the day, the best diet is the one you can stick to. It has to fit your life, your preferences, how your body responds. It's not one size fits all.
Couldn't have said it better myself. If you're miserable on a diet, even if it's like super scientifically proven, it's not the right diet for you.
You got to find something that you enjoy, something that feels sustainable. Okay, so all these reasons why diets fail, our bodies fighting back, the mental game, it all points to needing a more flexible approach, right? Something that's actually doable.
Exactly. And that brings us to the heart of it, the flexible dieting strategies that Lyle McDonald talks about. These are all about incorporating those intentional breaks, those little deviations, in a way that actually helps you stay on track.
All right, let's get into it. First up, Free meals. What exactly are we talking about here?
So a free meal, it's basically a planned break from your regular diet. It's a chance to enjoy some of those foods you might normally be restricting without feeling guilty or going completely off the rails.
So it's not just a free-for-all.
Not exactly. It's controlled, strategic. You're not trying to see how long you can stuff yourself in one sitting. The goal is to satisfy cravings, enjoy a treat, and then get right back on track with your next meal.
So like one meal, not a whole day of cheating.
Right. And even during that meal, you can still make some healthy choices. Maybe include a protein source, some veggies. It's about finding that balance.
So it's more of a conscious indulgence rather than a complete free-for-all. It's about enjoying the foods you love in moderation without letting it derail your progress. And I remember reading somewhere that some people even put a time limit on their free meals, like an hour or so.
Oh, yeah, that can be a helpful strategy for some people. It prevents the meal from turning into like an all-day grazing fest. But then the key is not to see that time limit as a challenge, to eat as much as possible in that hour.
Right, it's not a competitive eating contest. It's about enjoying the food mindfully and then moving on.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got free meals. What's the next level up?
Structured refeeds. These sound way more like scientific and intentional.
They are. So a refeed, it's a period where you actually increase your carb intake, sometimes for several hours, sometimes for a whole day or even more. And unlike a free meal, which is mostly for mental benefits, refeeds have some pretty cool benefits for your body too.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. So we're talking about like strategically overeating carbs. How does that help with fat loss?
So one of the main things refeeds do is replenish your glycogen stores. Glycogen, it's basically how your body stores carbs for energy. And when you're dieting, especially if you're working out, those stores can get depleted.
So it's like refilling the tank.
Exactly. And when your glycogen stores are full, your workouts feel better, you have more energy, and your body is less likely to break down muscle for fuel. Refeeds can also help with hormone balance, which can be messed up when you're dieting for a long time.
Interesting. So it's not just about like mental satisfaction. They're real physical benefits too.
Absolutely. Now, how often you refeed and for how long, that depends on a few things, like how intense your diet is, how much body fat you have to lose, how active you are. It's individual. McDonald breaks it down into these 3 categories based on body fat percentage.
Okay, break it down for us.
So category 1, that's for those who are already pretty lean, like maybe 15% body fat or lower for men, and around 24% or lower for women.
All right, the lean folks.
They might need to refeed more often, maybe even for a few days at a time, because their bodies are already pretty efficient at holding on to fat.
Makes sense. What about the rest of us?
Category 2, that's more like the average person. Maybe 16% to 25% body fat for guys and 25% to 34% for women. They would probably refeed less often and for shorter periods.
Got it. And the last category?
Category 3, that's for those who have more body fat to lose, like above 26% for men and 35% for women. McDonald suggests that this group might even want to hold off on refeeds at first and focus on just those free meals and diet breaks. They'll probably see good progress without the refeeds initially.
That makes sense. It's like a step-by-step approach.
Exactly. Now, it's important to remember that a refeed, it's not something you do in addition to your regular diet. It replaces a meal or a few meals.
Okay, so it's a strategic substitution.
Right. And it's not an excuse to eat whatever you want. The focus should be on those carb-rich foods like rice, potatoes, pasta, stuff that you might be limiting on your diet.
So load up on the carbs, but hold back on the fat. Why is that so important?
Well, when you eat a ton of carbs and fat together, your body is super efficient at storing that as fat. We don't want that. The goal of the refeed is to refill those glycogen stores and keep those hormones happy. So keep the fat low, maybe around 50 grams max for most people during a refeed.
Got it. It's all about strategy. Now, how do you know when to do a refeed? Are there any signs you should be looking for?
McDonald talks about this intuitive approach where you pay attention to your body's signals. If you're feeling super hungry all the time, lethargic, like your workouts are suffering, that could be a sign that you need a refeed. It's like your body's telling you it needs a break.
So it's not just about following a schedule. It's about listening to your body.
Exactly. But of course, you have to be honest with yourself. Sometimes you're just hungry because you're dieting, not because you actually need a refeed. You got to learn to tell the difference.
Makes sense. All right, so we've got free meals, structured refeeds. What's the final boss of flexible dieting?
Full diet breaks. This is where you take a planned break from dieting altogether. We're talking like 10 to 14 days of eating at maintenance calories.
Whoa, a whole break from dieting. That sounds kind of scary.
I know, right? but it can actually be incredibly beneficial, both physically and mentally. When you diet for a long time, your body goes through these adaptations, like those hormonal changes we talked about. Leptin goes down, thyroid hormones can take a dip. It's like your body is trying to conserve energy.
Right, it's fighting back.
Exactly. A diet break can help reset those hormones, give your body a chance to recover, and potentially even prevent some of that metabolic slowdown that can happen with long-term dieting. Plus, it gives you a mental break from tracking and restricting, which can help you stay on track in the long run.
It's like hitting the reset button.
Kinda, yeah. And it can help prevent those binges that happen when you feel too restricted. Now, one thing to keep in mind, you might see the scale go up a bit during a diet break, especially if you've been on a low-carb diet.
Oh, that's not what you want to see after working so hard.
I know, but it's usually not fat gain. It's mostly water weight from those glycogen stores refilling. It'll go back down when you resume your diet.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, how long should you diet before taking a break? Any guidelines there?
McDonald's suggests different ranges based on those same body fat categories we talked about before. So the leaner folks, they might need a break after like 4 to 6 weeks of dieting. Those in the middle category, maybe 6 to 12 weeks. And those with more body fat to lose, they could potentially go 12 to 16 weeks before needing a break.
So it's all about finding what works for you and your body. Now, how do you actually eat during a diet break?
He gives a couple of options. There's the non-counting method, where you just focus on making healthy choices and eating till you're satisfied. More frequent meals, lots of protein, healthy fats, fiber, just good, nourishing food.
So no calorie counting, just intuitive eating.
Exactly. And then there's the calculation method. This is where you actually figure out your maintenance calories, which is the number of calories you burn each day just by living. Then you can calculate your protein, carbs, and fat based on that. He provides some formulas and tables to help you do that.
So you can still track if you want to.
You can, but the key is to not stress about hitting those numbers perfectly. It's just a guideline. And either way, whether you're counting or not, your meals should still be balanced. Protein, carbs, fat, and all those good nutrients from veggies and fruits.
It's about nourishing your body, not just hitting numbers. All right, so you've had your diet break, you're feeling refreshed, and you're ready to get back to losing fat. What's the best way to ease back into a calorie deficit?
Slow and steady wins the race. Don't expect to drop tons of weight overnight. Aim for like 1 to 2 pounds of fat loss per week. That's a healthy and sustainable rate for most people.
Slow and steady, got it.
If you were doing the non-counting method before, just start reducing your food intake gradually. Maybe smaller portions, cutting back on those calorie-dense snacks. Keep an eye on your progress and adjust as needed. If you were tracking calories, just lower your daily intake by 10% or 20% from your maintenance level. And of course, keep prioritizing protein, fiber, and healthy fats. Those are your best friends.
And he has that table, right? The one that tells you how to adjust your calories based on how much weight you're losing.
Yep, that's a great tool to help you fine-tune things. It's all about finding what works for you. Wow, we covered a lot of ground today.
We did. This whole flexible dieting thing, it's a lot more nuanced than people think. It's not just about, like, eating whatever you want.
Definitely not. It's about finding a sustainable way to manage your eating, both physically and mentally.
It's about understanding your body, listening to its signals, and finding what works for you in the long run. So for all you listeners out there, I hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of what flexible dieting is really all about. It's about finding that balance between enjoying your favorite foods and achieving your health and fitness goals. It's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent and making choices that support your well-being over the long haul.
Yeah, it's about giving yourself permission to enjoy life without sacrificing your progress.
Exactly. Now, if you're interested in digging even deeper into this whole world of flexible dieting, I definitely recommend checking out Lyle McDonald's work. He goes into way more detail in his books and articles, and he even has some cool tools and calculators on his website. You can really geek out on this stuff if you want to.
There's definitely a lot to explore, and the more you understand, the more empowered you'll be to make choices that work for you.
And maybe you'll even be inspired to learn more about those different methods for estimating body fat percentage, like using calipers or those fancy Tanita scales. Or maybe you'll want to dive deeper into the fascinating world of hormones and how they influence our weight. There's always more to learn.
And that's what makes this whole journey so exciting.
Absolutely. So keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep finding what works for you. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into flexible dieting. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.